Hey, it's Will here, and welcome to this week's Photography Explained Landscape Photo Review Club live stream. There we go. Usually it takes me an attempt or two to get through that. And we are going to look at some of your images. We're going to run through them that you've submitted to the Facebook group here. So we have some inception here as this streaming, this is the stream that I'm on right now, is in front of us. We're going to take a look at some of your images, and I'm going to give you some feedback, good, bad, ugly, beautiful. I'll be as gentle as what I possibly can. A few things to touch on just before we do that. In that, we've just wrapped up our just about to wrap up our first cohort of Landscape Mastery, which if you go to photographyexplained.com, you can see down here. There's also a new product that we've launched because so many people from Landscape Mastery wanted further training. So there's now a 12-month membership. But if you click on Landscape Mastery here, Landscape Mastery is a 6-week live training program where I go through and basically hold your hand as much as what's needed to get you from where you are to creating professional level images. You can see a lovely testimonial here from Eduardo cohort, I'm very grateful for that, Eduardo, if you're watching this, mate. And all the details are on this page here. If you tons of other kind of comments from other people and what their thoughts are, and it explains how it all works. But if you want to work with me for the next 6 weeks, this cohort 2 is now completely sold out. So it'll be January, February, end of February will be cohort 3. It's probably going to sell out before we get to the kind of middle of February. It might sell in the next couple of weeks or so. So make sure you click apply, follow the process if you want to work with me for the next 6 weeks, and go again from taking decent or even terrible photos to pretty decent or even professional level. So that's the first thing I wanted to touch on. The other thing that I wanted to touch on is this. We are working behind the scenes to basically try and innovate the landscape photography space because it's just dead. It's a bunch of boring old farts, content creators, or I'm trying to, how am I going to be polite about this? It's a bunch of people that may be able to take a half decent photo that aren't very helpful in helping other people create their own great photos. Is that a fair thing to say? I think that's a relatively fair thing to say. So we're working on a bunch of tools. This one will come out for free at some point. I'm going to give access to this to the people in our training programs first. But if I just do a quick demo, this may fall apart as I do this in real time. I'm just going to put my email address in here, will@photographyexplained. And this is going to now give us feedback on the composition of the image that I just submitted. So we'll give it a hot second here, but we're likely to we are building this out further. So this will exist, and this will be a free tool for everyone who watches the YouTube channel. But we're also going to do some more very specific tools for people who are in our training programs to give them quick, somewhat accurate feedback on composition, on editing. We're working on one potentially on, hey, what is the weather going to be like at this specific location at this time? Should I bother going out to shoot it? That's the kind of tools that we're looking to build. So the AI here been built on the back of my feedback that I've given to the hundreds and hundreds of photos that have been submitted in Landscape Mastery, our training program. It gives us a first impression. So how peaceful it is, drawn to the warm glow, hitting the cross and the rocks, creates such lovely contrast against the cool, hazy valley in the background. A quiet, sacred moment. Fine. So the initial impression is always quite positive. But then it starts to give us some detailed feedback here. I think you've done a good job positioning the cross off center to the right. It gives our eye room to kind of see the rolling hills, which is how I composed it. Light and exposure, the quality of light here is stunning. You captured golden hour warmth. Try this. So it's also giving you feedback. Try this. If the camera allows, try a subtle HDR bracket or slightly longer exposure to pull in more texture out of the darkest shrubs. So yeah, fair. As I look at this image here, kind of shrunk it in on my screen rather than full screen, maybe this side of the frame is a little dark. No, fair enough. The choice of aperture is spot on. The foreground's sharp, but the clarity carries all the way through. Post-processing is very tasteful and restrained, which I really appreciate. So this is communicating its feedback in my voice, basically. It doesn't look over-processed. So it's using a lot of my opinions on how I like landscapes to be edited, for better or worse. But yeah, some decent feedback there. So this tool is going to go live at some point to everyone broadly, but people in our training programs are going to get it first, and then there's going to be a handful of other tools that we're going to be pumping out there as well. So if this is interesting to you, if you want a bunch of quick, feedback to your images, then stay tuned to the YouTube channel because that's where you're going to see and learn about all of this first. Or join one of our training programs and you'll get access to everything. That's how it works. So with all that said, let's take a look at some of your images. So the first image here from John. So what do I think? I think maybe a little bit dark. If I open this up in Photoshop just very quickly, can we just increase the exposure? Just a tad. So that to me is immediately a more better edited image. This could be, and I've had this with a few people in my landscape mastery program over the course of a couple of weeks. They would upload a photo to the community there, and I would take a look and review it. And the same people will get in dark images time after time after time again. Turns out that their monitors were not calibrated. And so for the sake of £100 or whatever it is for a monitor calibration tool, or just trying to borrow one off a friend, that's made a big difference to their images because they were seeing a well-exposed, a well-edited image on their screen, but then when they would send it anywhere else, other people were not seeing that. So that might be something to consider here, John. Other than that, perhaps I think you've got some water splashes on your lens. All this seems to be blurred out. Other than that, I'd perhaps want to reduce the brightness of this top half here, just so my eye doesn't quite shoot out of the frame just quite as much. Just pull back the highlights, the contrast just a little bit. Again, only subtle, but that's probably something I would consider. And then can we just add a little bit more focus on the actual water? Because I don't think we're anywhere near. I think we're anywhere near. Oh no, there's a little bit of clip in there, but obviously what I'm doing here is like essentially an inverse vignette, right? I would be just seeing if we can just, especially with the raw file, so you can pull back the specific highlights there. I'd just be thinking, can we just pull a bit more attention towards the center of the frame? And it looks to me a little bit almost muddy, which tells me the color balance might be off slightly. It's probably a little bit more realistic, but less pretty. So then that becomes a artistic choice as opposed to the reality here. But then I would also, having done that inverse vignette, I'm just going to add a big solid vignette to it. See if we can just pull the eye a little bit more towards the center of the frame here. That's probably what I would be considering here. Again, something a little bit more like that. Just even a bit more exposure there. So yes, that is what I would be considering for an image like this. But I like the composition, and maybe I would have used a slightly slower shutter speed, just as the water's a little bit milky. I mean, you can deal with that a little bit with a, I'll just use this section here, but just brush in. You can brush in a little bit of clarity potentially, just to add a little bit more to those areas. But then again, subjective, depends on what you're trying to achieve. But for me, I like just a little bit more texture to the water there. Just polishes it off. So there we go. Hopefully that was useful. And there we go. Let's jump over to, well, you can see there's a dramatic difference there, right, between the brightness of the image, if nothing else. That's what I'd be looking at. But nice image. You can have a like. There we go. Next, we have Scott Alexander. Very lovely. I think if you're going to crop the boy to be in the middle of the frame, you should probably have it bang on in the middle of the frame. So maybe you can crop the image over slightly. If this is a film effect, I'd probably tone it down a little bit. And you probably almost certainly got a bit more room for darkening the sky here. There just seems to be a big gap between where the sky is being vignetted and then this horizon line here. So maybe I'd be wanting to just pull this down slightly, I guess. Just so there's less. Should pull the shadows up so I could pull the overall exposure down. So I'd be looking for something a little bit more balanced like that, perhaps. But again, we're talking subtleties here, right? But that to me leaves like a third of the frame, a third of the frame, then a third of the frame at the top. So that's what perhaps I would be considering. So what I mean by that is you've got kind of thirds, and even this is probably a little bit just too much white space. Yep, maybe I'd pull that down, or maybe I'll just crop a bit off the top as well. That's probably your option there. Which I won't do because you've got this burnt edge, and so it's going to be a bit of a mess to mask out. But that's the feedback for that image. Thank you for submitting it, Scott. You can have a like. Good man. Cool. Kevin. Now, did I give you, Kevin, feedback last week on a shot very similar to this? Someone last week did a silhouette of some cactus, some cacti. I give them the feedback that they should be lower in the frame. So they are lower, so shooting up slightly towards the cactus. So the cactus is silhouetted against the background. Because in the previous image, the cactus was kind of cut off here. If that is the case, you took the advice, and this is a much better image. Now, I would still like to see the cactus start here. So probably be like that high in the frame. But you might have been trying to consider that you don't want to touch this cloud and cross over there, which is, fine judgment. But yeah, you just I would be a little bit lower just to get this kind of branch and this above the horizon line there. But some beautiful colors. I think you could probably crop a chunk off the top here. Just to balance it out a little bit more. And again, makes the cactus a little bit more important in the frame. And then we don't want to crop too much out because this, to me, is like a bird. So you've got a bird's body, bird's tail, and the wings. This is one occasion where the cloud actually is really pretty and not quite, but almost stands out on its own. And you've done a good job of crushing the black, so they're actually black. So it's fully silhouetted. But yeah, the only thing is perhaps shoot slightly further this way. So hopefully you'd have some separation between this arms of the cactus like you've got on the other side. Might not be possible. Obviously, I wasn't there. But yeah, if those arms of the cactus were sticking out as opposed to being hidden in the silhouette, and it was just a nudge higher, then I think you'd be onto a really cracking image here. I think it's a nice image as it is, but I think they would be the kind of the icing on the cake. And yeah, you're losing some of the impact of the cloud there, but I think that now the cactus becomes a more cohesive part of the image when we've cropped in that far. So cool. Yeah, but nice image. And if this was based on feedback I gave you last week, good for you, Kevin, because that made a massive difference. Cool. You can also have a like. I feel like I don't really give out likes. Not because I'm stingy with them or there's some kind of reason for it. But everyone can have a like today, unless your image is absolutely terrible, and in which case we might hold back on it. Here we have Jeff. Right, so this is an awesome location, but you've just not quite nailed the image. And it's not a bad image. The issue you've got is, and sometimes, being someone who spends a decent amount of time out at lakesides trying to get pictures of things, the issue you've got is big blue sky, and then this tree is just too close to the mountain range here. Ideally, we'd want kind of this center line here to perhaps be a little bit further over. Not too fussed. You've got some just trash basically in the frame there. I'm not too bothered about that. You could clone that out if you really wanted to. And then the other thing, and this is kind of a bit boring advice, but it tends to be what happens with most reflection shots, is most people try to get the reflection, and so we might go wider so we're not missing out too much. But most people tend to get the horizon of the reflection in the center of the frame. So we're running out of space here a little bit to do that. So maybe a crop a bit more like that, and probably a little bit more space, top and bottom, is what's required here. But this tree's kind of killing you. So what you want to be is, another 10 foot stood that way, and having the tree in the foreground to show depth can be really valuable, especially on a misty day like this, because this tree will have much less mist and so like atmospheric haze versus these trees versus these trees versus the mountain in the back. So you then have lots of depth in the image, which is really important for a landscape shot like this. But it's just two on top of these trees here. And again, we want this center line of these rocks, which I feel like is the kind of the subject. That's where my eyes go into of all this. And I kind of want to just shift it over. And so you would have achieved that by moving over to the left. Now, it's easier said than done. Who knows? Maybe the path doesn't allow you to go further that way. And you didn't want to get absolutely soaked because it looks bloody freezing here. So absolutely reasonable. But that's the feedback. I could give you some thoughts on the edit, but I think the composition is the main thing here that is to be pondered on. So that image. But yeah, if you're off in Japan, Jeff, and you got regular access to sites like this, it's a matter of time before, without any skill whatsoever, you'll look into something beautiful. Not to say that you have no skill, but the skill that you have, or if you do a bit of work and improve your skill set, obviously your look quotient goes up massively. But just being around these beautiful mountains is half the battle, more than half the battle. Cool, Joan. Right. I think if we just do a bit of AI fandanglery here, we can fix what is the glaring problem, which is the bottom of these trees are cut off. Get rid of the benches as well. That's fine. But the bottom of the trees being cut off, you've sacrificed the trees for the sky, and the sky is not interesting. The sky is just a bright blue sky, adds no value to this image whatsoever. So if we just use a content aware fill, will this do a good job? Who knows? No, it's done a terrible job. So we could do a content aware fill, and then perhaps we can then just clone out these bits of tree that have been added that don't need to be there. Who knows if this is going to work? This is already 3 steps closer to being a disaster. But we shall give it a minute. A few questions come in. The Infinite Arch. I hope I made the cutoff. I posted one from Iceland last week in the group. I will fly through and see if I can get to an Iceland shot. I will not let you down. And do drop me another message if I say I'm wrapping up and I've not got to your shot. We'll get to it. Promise you, we'll get to it if it's there. So now, if we just copy and paste this image in again. So we've now got the 2 layers to compare. Again, the trees being cut off at the bottom is what is really killing this shot. Now with a little bit more tree in there, let's get rid of some of these benches. Probably get rid of those 3 rocks there. Oh, doing it on the wrong layer, so that's just ruined that layer. Let's do it on the top layer. Get rid of these benches. Oh, has to think about those benches there for whatever reason. Fine. Again, these rocks are just a bit. The rocks are just a little bit too close to the frame, a bit distracting. I'm going to get rid of that post. Fine. It's not good. It's not done a good job of this, but I'm not. We're not doing this to get paid, I guess. So I'm just going to reduce some of the sky. So this is, after a little bit of work, the composition that I'd be looking at for a scene like this, if I was literally stood there. So now we've got a good starting point. So if I now open Camera Raw, there's loads of color here that's not being pulled out. And so, I mean, we could just go to Vibrance and just see if that gets us closer, which I would say that it does. Now, I don't necessarily want the sky being massively blue. I don't know if there's value in that. So I'm just going to do a linear gradient across the sky. Just pull back the saturation there because I don't want the eye to go straight out of the scene. But just a touch more vibrance there. And we're using vibrance because that's pulling up the areas of the image that are not as saturated, versus saturation just increasing the saturation of everything. If we increase the saturation, we just look like everything's glowing and there's been some kind of looks like a poster as opposed to reality. Probably a little bit more green tint add. But now we're getting there. Now that is quite a nice little composition. So the only other thoughts on this would be you're kind of not really committed as to whether these trees are going to be above this horizon line or below it. I think we'd want to be a little bit further back if possible so we could get the bottom of the trees in, and then maybe a little bit lower just so the top of the trees just reached a little bit higher up in the frame. Now, maybe you considered this and you didn't want the top of the trees breaching that part of the mountain range. Fine. So maybe that was the compromise. But I certainly also would have moved slightly to my right just to separate this bush from this tree, just to tidy it up. Other than that, once you've got these bottom of the trees in there, I think these trees with this almost like desert-like sand, and there's obviously the mountains are beautiful behind. I think you're doing a fine job there. I think you're pretty close to what I would be shooting, which is awesome. So hopefully that's useful. I appreciate Joan you showing up and dropping some images in. Cool. Martin. So you got some lovely conditions. I just wonder if, and I'm no wildlife photographer, obviously. If you saw any of my images of birds or bugs or snails or whatever it is, you'd understand. I just wonder if these birds being a little bit further over would have kind of made the image just a little bit bland on that side of it. In which case, can we just do a bit of a crop and refocus our kind of like mental energy towards, we'll do a 3-2 or a 2-3. Because there's that bird in the tree in the background, and those three birds together, I feel like almost hold the image. Maybe we'll just do a little bit of the birds are a bit too far apart there. If we look at the kind of rule of thirds as we adjust this, we'd want that bird to be just slightly further over, in which case maybe just expanding it slightly. That's slightly nicer. But yeah, if you've took like a gazillion images of this and you've been like machine gunning with shots, then that's something to consider. The only other thing is probably don't know on this because you've got it getting brighter at the top of the frame, but maybe a vignette could just stop the eye shooting out at the top of the frame. Because I feel like because it's getting lighter, that's where my eye really wants to go. I know people get a bit arsy with editing too much on wildlife shots. I'd probably be looking for something a bit more like that. You can pull that vignette a bit further down now. We've increased the brightness in the middle of the frame. And then, oops, we're just affecting the vignette there rather than globally. Yeah, so maybe something like that. Maybe pull the vignette up slightly just so this, or maybe you'd have to do a separate radial gradient just to give that bird a little bit. You have to be really delicate with this. Just a little bit more oomph in the scene. So maybe something like that. The vignette's a bit strong there. It looks like a nuclear explosion's gone off in the background, but you get the idea. I'm trying to create this triangle of the birds here, whilst having these somewhat more towards the kind of rule of thirds. But my favorite thing is this point of rocks, the light, and then the light. I mean, that's what, if we're going to re-edit this, that's what we'd be trying to emphasize. But just too much space on the left-hand side here. And again, the interest is on the right. So let's lean into the interest rather than just having having the birds fly into space is important, but I don't really need that much space. And this tree bush here, because there's so much contrast difference between that and the background. It's competing with all the actual interesting stuff on the other side of the frame. So yeah, cool. Here we have Orurin. Right. You got a location like this, you've won. That is it. This, without these amazing conditions, is an incredible shot. With these conditions, wow. Now, I'd be immediately cloning out probably your mates up here. Get rid of them. He's going to have some legs left as I do that. Fine. So I didn't do a good job of that, but you... a more specific selection would do it. Fine, that'll do for this, the sake of this. Now, the only thing here is we don't have much contrast in the scene. So if you look at the histogram, there is absolutely no darks, and then the lights, there's our peak here could potentially be stretched all the way over.